last Friday, Punisher Season 2 dropped on Netflix, so I loaded up my kids into the van, drove them to their grandparents' house, and binge watched the whole season this weekend. So let's talk about it. Hi, if you're new here, my name is SeanChandler, and I started this channel essentially because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies and TV way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place and consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, join me down in the comments section. What did you think about this season? Did it live up to your expectations? How does it compare to the first season? How does it compare to other Marvel Netflix shows? I'd love to have a nice, lively discussion about it. Also, after this video, check out this video up above where I ranked all of the live-action Punisher movies. If you enjoy the Punisher, you'll enjoy that video. And one kind of piece of behind the scenes stuff, some of you might notice that the picture quality looks different. I am using a different camera. It's just a little bit of an experiment. It's a slightly different version of the webcam I normally shoot with, except this one is wider angle so I can move my arms around a little bit more and you can see more of my shelves. I knew some of you would ask that down in the comments if I didn't address it up front, so I'm addressing it up front. With that said, as I go into my review, it's going to be a little spoilery. I'm kind of assuming that people by now that are watching a video about the Punisher TV series like the show and have watched the show. I'm not going to go super spoily. I'm going to kind of toe the line a little bit on how much I'm talking about details. With all of that said, let's get started talking about this season. And overall, what I'll say from the get-go is I thought the first 3 episodes were great. The last 4 episodes were great. And the 6 in the middle, I thought were very meandering and lacking in focus and urgency, unfortunately. So for me, watching through the season, after those first 3 episodes when they're not in New York City, I was thinking to myself, I think I'm gonna like this season a lot more than the first season. And then as soon as they pick up and go back to New York City, for me, I mean, it was like the brakes were just slammed on and the show kind of moved to a halt for about 6 episodes. There just wasn't a forward momentum. There wasn't an urgency to the plot, a threat. The acting was still great. There were some ideas being explored. Characterizations were pretty cool. There's certainly some scenes in there that I loved. But as for like a story that I was invested in, I mean, I was pulling my phone out a lot and just kind of scrolling through things because it just wasn't nearly as interesting as it had been before. And then you get to episode 10 and it picks back up and I was like all on board. Phone was thrown on the floor and totally invested until the end of the season. There's a lot of talk amongst people about how the Marvel Netflix shows have a lot of padding, that the season runs should be more like 8 to 10 episodes as opposed to 13 episodes. And I would say for this season right here, that's what this felt like for me, that they had an 8-episode season that they stretched out to 13 episodes because those 6 episodes in the middle felt like 2 episodes worth of plot that just kept stretching it out and going in circles and people talking about the same stuff and things that just weren't very interesting. And so over half of this season didn't really work for me. With all that said, I'll start walking through the season a little bit, and I'll start things off talking about the season opener. And we see kind of Frank wandering the earth, and he ends up in a bar where he meets a couple of girls. One of them is a lady that seems to fancy him a little bit. And I thought that this was a really nice little plot line because we get to see normal Frank. We're gonna go into Punisher mode. We're gonna see him shoot a lot of people in the face, kick a lot of people in the face, stomp on a lot of faces. But the first episode shows him being a normal guy. You get a taste of the personality that he had before everything went down and who he could potentially be if not for the fact that his family was murdered and now he kills people that are evil. And so I just loved the nice touches in the season opener of getting to see normal Frank. It's just great to see a bunch of the things that we love about Frank that don't involve violence. And then in the latter 15 minutes of the episode, the plot starts to kick in and we get to see the violent things that we love about Frank as the other girl who's the main girl of the season. Her plot line kicks in and he decides to help someone that he sees in danger. And this sets in motion the course of the season. As it turns out, she's being hunted down by a group of people and there's religious nuts in the mix. There's mercenaries in the mix. It seems like there's hillbillies thrown into the mix. And this sets up the first 3-episode arc that I just thought worked really well. It's a very simple type plot of someone has information. They don't want to even say what it is to the person helping them. They're not being very helpful to themselves. And there's far worse people hunting them down. And so Frank is in the middle of all of this and quite angry about some other things as well. And therefore, it just sets up a tension and an urgency where you know people are going to find them and Frank's going to do awesome things. But you don't know how it's going to play out. You don't know when it's going to play out. And so it just worked really nicely for me. In particular, episode 3, where they end up at a jail. And this sort of thing, I just love episodes like this. It's a reminder of movies like Assault in Precinct 13, some old John Wayne films, very classic action movie, Western plotline about people holed up with the sheriff trying to keep prisoners while knowing worse people are coming. Very nice little plotline. And it's fun to see it with Frank Castle. And in a season like this, where in particular, when you get to New York, the episodes kind of start to run together a little bit because it's a lot of the same types of things happening over and over again. It's the one that stands out the most to me. It's the one that has a plot line that is very distinct, has a distinct location where you know what the bad guys are trying to do and you know what Frank's trying to do. And there's some great Frank moments inside it. So I loved that episode, and really the whole first 3 episodes worked great for me. The girl was a little bit annoying for me at times because she's being so difficult. She's very clearly in over her head, in danger, and isn't doing anything to help herself with the people that can potentially save her life, and at times just kind of screwing over Frank. So that was a little bit annoying. They could have made her perhaps a little bit more likable in her flightiness and what she's trying to do. But as the characters progressed throughout the season, that she grew on me a little bit. For me, when the season was focused in on this storyline, it worked for me because there's bad guys that you knew who the bad guys were, what they were after, and there's an urgency to it. And so we're on the run. And so it had momentum to it. When the show talked about the other plot line that we're going to get to in just a little bit, it just seemed like we were talking in circles a whole lot. And so inside of this main plot line, you of course have the main religious zealot guy that's trying to hunt the girl down. And as the season progresses, we get more of his backstory, more kind of what's going on with him. And he gets weirder and more interesting to me as the season goes along, as we start to realize he's sort of like a freaky alternate universe version of Frank that's a religious nut, but he's also just this intense guy that can take guys out too. And so the character, I really liked what they did with him as the season went along, and I just wish we actually got more time with him and that they spent more time developing this plot line and having a little bit more depth to it, especially later in the season where there's elements of like assassins and bounties being put out on Frank and the girl. There's things they could have done with that they didn't do. It was unexplored territory, which is really odd when, as I said before, it felt like this season was 4 episodes too long, maybe 3, 4, 5 episodes too long. And so there was room in there to have an episode of assassins in New York City trying to get Frank. Like, there's just, like you just say it, and it's really obvious what you could have done with the ingredients that they already gave us inside of the story. And even the casting on this side of it, there was some nice little additions in there with Annette O'Toole, Corbin Bernstein in the mix, that some actors that we've all seen before in different things. It's nice to see them show up here in the show, and especially like with Ma Kent, Annette O'Toole, and Lana Lang from different versions of Superman, who's always this sweetheart. Seeing her as this horrible person was a nice turn for the character, I thought. So this plot line, all in all, worked for me. I liked the resolutions inside of it. I would have liked a little bit more development, more time with it. And I think they could have given us probably at least 2 more big action set pieces out of this plot line, with an episode with the assassins and a big showdown somewhere with him and assassins, as well as in the final episode. I think there's a little bit more you could have done with the final showdown with the people responsible for all of this stuff. From there, let's move on to our other main plot line, which is Billy Russo and his therapist, or as I call it, Joker and Harley Quinn. And for me, I really did not like this plotline. I thought the ideas of what they did with Billy Russo, of him his brain being scrambled and his mind is a jigsaw, while his face is a jigsaw. He can't really remember things. He doesn't understand what's going on. He is legitimately crazy from what Frank did to him. I think all that was really good. The actual plot line of what they did with this, I just don't think worked. I just didn't have anything to it. And the acting was great. Ben Barnes does a fantastic job as this guy that is truly tormented by his brain that is broken and not understanding why this happened to him or what is going on. And as he learns who's responsible, he doesn't get it and he can't put the pieces together because his brain is so jacked up. All of that is very interesting to me. But at the same time, the plot line that they gave him just didn't go anywhere for so long. And it's like he's building a group of people together. There's the Joker and Harley Quinn romance going on. But it goes on for 10 episodes before he has any plot against Frank. It's just circles and circles. And I think the worst part about it to me is that there was a lot of sermonizing and lecturing, especially from the therapist character trying to explain why what he's doing is justified and why Frank isn't, and all sorts of things about who's Frank to judge other people's actions while totally being fine with all the terrible actions of Jigsaw and Billy Russo. And so there's just a lot of moralizing and ethical discussion that was crazy because they were crazy people. They were legitimately crazy people having these moral discussions. Like, how could he do this to me? Why would he do this to me? And then he learns why he did it to him. Well, this wasn't right what he did to me. This was an overreaction. You're like, oh, it's not. Like, you killed his family. And he's a crazy person, so you can understand why he's saying that, but why is Harley Quinn saying all of this? And so there's just a lot of broken logic inside of it. And so hearing moral arguments that are irrational and don't line up and are just crazy was very frustrating for me. And it wasn't something I enjoyed all that much. Once it did get to Jigsaw having a plot against Frank Castle, suddenly it got a lot more interesting and the show got a lot more fun. And that was for me, that episode 4 through 9, where it just seemed like a lot of people talking in circles and just things happening and mysteries that weren't very interesting. It was just meandering for me. And as soon as Billy Russo had a scheme, show got a lot more interesting. Suddenly Frank's in a lot more danger. Suddenly the police are after him. Suddenly crazy religious nut guys after him again. And so the show picked up and it was great again. So it's a season that was very frustrating for me because I just don't know what they were trying to do in that episode 4 through 9 range where it just seemed dragged out way too long. The acting was still great. When there were action sequences, they were great, but there wasn't a plot that gave us momentum. There wasn't Jigsaw with an evil scheme. Even religious nut people were kind of like sidelined in here, and so just things were kind of happening. And that's really what the whole middle section of this season was not no main bad guy that Frank is directly engaging and no evil scheme that they're trying to enact. So it's just all circles and circles and circles for a long time, unfortunately. And it's literally 6 episodes where I was kind of losing a little bit of interest, and then episode 10 hits and immediately my interest is piqued again, and there's threats from Billy Russo, the police, there's injuries, there's assassins, crazy zealot guy shows up, and we're learning about crazy zealot guy, and suddenly he's a lot more interesting than he had been for 5 episodes. And so everything gets more interesting, and it contrasted with the episode that came right before and the 5 episodes before that. You could feel the interest level, the intrigue, the momentum pick up instantly, and it held until the end of the season. So for me, I just could feel the parts that were good and the parts that were just very mediocre, stretched out Marvel Netflix stuff. Unfortunately. So this season for me was a very mixed bag, to where I'd say the great moments are just as great as any of the other Punisher stuff we've had, but it's definitely got about 4 episodes of filler right there in the middle where it loses a lot of momentum. I'll say this, if you enjoyed season 1, you should check it out, but if you were skeptical at leaving season 1, this one you can probably skip. Remember to check out that ranking right over there of the live-action Punisher movies, or right below that is a playlist of all of my Marvel Netflix rankings. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much in 2019.